Good morning, everybody. This is the DP Solutions End of Windows 7 webinar. It is now 11 o'clock, and we're just going to give everyone a minute or so to log in, and we will kick off. All right, good morning, everybody. This is DP Solutions End of Windows 7 webinar. My name is Jill Rose. I'm your moderator and webinar organizer. Just wanted to start off with a few housekeeping tips. First of all, everyone has been placed on mute just to cut down on any background noise. So if you do have any questions, you can use your question box to type them out during the webinar. We'll answer them at the end. Also, there will be a recording of this webinar placed on our website later this afternoon. We'll be emailing that out to all of the attendees later today. With that, I'm going to go ahead and kick things off to our presenter, Mr. Ben Schmerler. Ben, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jill, and thanks everybody for attending today. I take this webinar in particular very seriously. You know, we sort of have a timer left on Windows 7 and by extension Windows Server 2008. I think it's really important. You know, it may seem like January is a long time from now, but really, if you haven't begun planning your migration off of Windows 7, the time is now. Consider this like your first step in creating a plan. You can, you know, the points and the ideas that I'm going to bring up today, you can kind of think as an opportunity to start doing your own homework about things that you need to do so that if you want to work with DPS or whoever to migrate from Windows 7 to your next solution, you know, get all your ducks in a row first before we begin doing that. So I am Ben Schmerler. I'm the Director of Strategic Operations here at DP Solutions. And we're going to go through this stuff today, and I'll go through an agenda in a moment, and then we'll do the presentation, a little Q&A at the end. So rest in peace, Windows 7. You served us well. You know, this was, you know, I'm fond of Windows 7. I admit. We used it for a long time. I mean, a lot of people on this call probably remember not just Windows 7, but also this little thing called Windows 8 and Windows 8.1, which we don't hear a whole lot about today. It kind of hit a bump in terms of push outs. But Windows 7 is going away in January 2020. This happened, you know, I think a lot of people probably remember in a while back, we had a similar situation with Windows XP and Server 2003, and it was a big deal. And I would think in that time too, it would be even more significant considering the infrastructure and infrastructure challenges that existed at that time. And now we're moving into a world where things are a little bit more cloud-based, a little more SaaS-based, and compatibility and the bring your own device mindset has sort of come in. And we can do this in a little bit more structured, a little easier way, and I think in a way that sort of makes your system's life cycle a little bit easier to manage. But it's super important that we get this done before January, because when January hits, every day we leave these products in place after support ends, we're going to make our organization more vulnerable to attack, system failure, and data breaches. You know, to put it simply, we cannot support these products effectively in January. And you're really putting yourself at risk, and then we're going to be in a very reactive and dangerous mode, and I really don't want anybody to be in that position. So for the agenda today, we're going to talk about what EOL, or what, you know, end of life is for specifically for Microsoft products or for Windows products, and what that means to you. And I'm going to go beyond just it stops getting patches. I want to think about it on a broader level. We're going to talk about upgrade paths and advice for PCs and laptops. So obviously that's the Windows 7 side, you know, the devices, the endpoints that you use to work every day. Things to keep in mind, ways to approach your changes, so on and so forth. And the answers for these things are not going to be the same for every individual. It's going to depend on what kind of work you do, what organization you're in, your security concerns, what applications you use, what's your push to the cloud. And are you even doing the same stuff right now that you were doing back when you got that Windows 7 machine? We're going to talk a little bit about what Windows will probably look like into the future and the concept of services as opposed to products. We'll get into this a little bit later, but as you see software as a service and the cloud rise, you're also seeing the rise of services in general. And I think, again, another thing a lot of people probably remember is the idea of years and years and years ago, if you wanted to put Windows XP on an old PC, you had to go out and you'd spend, I think it was like $300 to buy a Windows XP box with the license in it. And obviously that is shifting. That is really not where things are going for Microsoft. Microsoft wants to make things very much a service, an ongoing service. And I think this Windows 10 thing is going to be a big push in that direction. We're going to talk a little bit about server upgrade replacement and major considerations. These are kind of two tracks. So Windows 7, it's more about getting the end user what they need to be successful for a device for the next few years on a new Windows platform. Server replacements are obviously a lot more complicated. We have to get into what the purpose is of the server, different options that may be out there, migration challenges, going from server 2008 to either a new in-house server or perhaps an Azure server or some other cloud solution or a SaaS solution has a lot of implications, much more than replacing a PC, as you might imagine. We're going to talk about, in general, the cloud's impact and influence moving forward. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about how infrastructure as a whole and design is going to change because of the cloud. The things we did in the past are just not the things we're going to be doing in the future, and the cloud is not going away. Software as a service is not going away. We're going to see more of this, not less, and I think it speaks to this stuff. And then Q&A. It's super important to us that we leave lots of time today to take any questions you might have, try and address things. Obviously we can't answer every possible question. There may be some intimate things that are very specific to you that we'll want to address one-on-one after the webinar, but we definitely want to open it up to you and get that done. So, if this isn't happening until January, I have some time, right? It's 9 months from now. I could have a baby in that time. I have some time to plan that stuff. Well, yes, you do have some time. But I would say that if you have any significant amount of infrastructure that's on these old Windows platforms, we really should be coming up with at least a plan to address it now. Maybe we're not implementing new PCs today or replacing a server a month from now, but we should at least have on our calendar when we expect these things to happen. And it should be thought out and planned out in advance so that we leave ourselves wiggle room. There is a very strong likelihood that no matter what you end up doing, that there will be some kind of challenge to this migration. Maybe it could be as mundane as, the old printer I was using that's 10 years old doesn't work on my new PC. Well, that's something we can pretty easily manage. But if we're talking a Server 2008 migration, we may need to go to a whole new version of a core application, which requires a data migration and all this other stuff. And these are big deals. And so we can't wait until December to start planning that out. We really should think about what those implications mean right now. And that way we know how much wiggle room we have, what kind of challenges we might face, where do we need to plan downtime in. I just think if we're not talking about this stuff now, we're essentially setting ourselves up for failure and security risk, and we cannot afford that. I'm going to get into this a little bit more later, but I think that the risks of not moving to Windows 10 from Windows 7 are more significant than missing the boat on Windows XP to Windows 7 that we had a few years ago because of the security landscape. So we really, really must start planning this now. So what does end of life really mean for Windows? And this, I guess, could apply both to Windows 7 and Windows Server 2008. The short answer is that you'll stop getting patches and updates to their product, but there are bigger concerns and actual practical ramifications for end of life. The first is that any device that is running an older system will be targeted more. So WannaCry, which I imagine a lot of people are familiar with, was targeting Windows XP after that product had been sunset. And it is kind of amazing that Microsoft even released a patch after that time, but I would not expect that anymore moving forward. Bad guys, the people who are looking to infect you with ransomware, who are looking to steal data, etc., they're like any other criminal. They're looking for the low-hanging fruit. They're not going to the house with all the locks on the doors. They're going to the house with the doors wide open. And frankly, again, every day that Windows 7 remains in place in January 2020, the more open that door gets. Not only are the vulnerabilities on Windows 7 going to exist and not be patched after January, but also anything that is an unknown vulnerability will just exist. There won't be any kind of landscape to deal with this stuff because it's going to be information that the bad guys have that the vendors protecting it do not. So you're going to be more targeted if you're not off of Windows 7. Future vulnerabilities may not be documented, so I kind of alluded to this further. If somebody in February 2020 identifies a vulnerability in Windows 7 or Server 2008, I don't think they're going to share this thing with the community. They're going to exploit it to take advantage of it. And there may be nothing that you can do to deal with it except react and try and recover from it. And honestly, recovery is very important. We should have disaster recovery, backup recoveries, things like that. That's obviously very critical, and we have these things. But I call this sort of a just case, in case of emergency, break open glass kind of thing. We shouldn't be using our backup and disaster recovery products as security products. We should be looking at these as last resort products. So we don't want to be in a position where we even have to use them, honestly. Application providers are going to be unwilling to troubleshoot problems. Now, this extends all across the board. So, for one, consider antivirus, right? WebRoot, which is a product we use often, is going to one day say, we're not providing updates to Windows 7 products anymore because A, it's not worth their time and money to develop unique patches, unique software for an operating system that is no longer mainstream. That's obviously a really big deal. But what about other application providers? So when Adobe says, hey, we're just not making Adobe Reader anymore for Windows 7, a product that often has security flaws and updates within it. Well, now Adobe Reader is that much more vulnerable on your machine. Or you may not even be able to use the product. They may disable that service. If you're using a product that's a subscription model, perhaps say Adobe Photoshop, where you have these, I think it's Creative Cloud now, where you log in. It's totally possible that you'll log into that portal one day and all of a sudden the installer from Windows 7 won't even be available. So you have to get off of this stuff. It just won't be around much longer. Some software as a service providers will no longer support access from the browser, I would imagine. So imagine if you are a SaaS provider and you have a lot of considerations, not only providing a good application for people to work on, but also you have compliance concerns, right? You are now housing all of this data for your customers. You are their platform holder. You have a lot of liability. You're not going to let just any device connect to your software as a service model. It creates liability for these platform holders, so they're going to cut it off. And they're going to say, if you're not on Windows 10, we're not going to support you, or future updates to our platform will not support Windows 7. And that's very reasonable and rational. They have their own liabilities and concerns to work out, and they're businesses that have to operate with current technology and current products. So end of life, as you can sort of see from this slide, end of life has some big ramifications, not just from a software vulnerability perspective, but from an overall management perspective and usability perspective. So we really, again, if I haven't made the case strong enough already, we really need to make a switch now. So upgrading your hardware. So one thing I'm going to say is that Microsoft themselves basically says that if you're on a Windows 7 PC, in all likelihood, you should just be getting a new PC to go to Windows 10. This is on their website. I'm not sitting here and saying that all Windows 7 PCs must be removed and we have to put in new hardware to do Windows 10. But, when I look at the devices that we support, the ones that are still on Windows 7, the ones that are maybe 3 or 4 years old, it really just doesn't make sense to spend the money on the software to upgrade them to Windows 10 when you consider the hardware life may not last much longer. So in general, it makes sense to replace the devices. But before you do any replacements or upgrades, we have to do some proper planning. So I would say for each individual that has a device, especially if you work in an office where the devices are not uniform. There are some places where you got 25 PCs in place and all those PCs do the exact same thing. You have a very sort of streamlined, structured thing. But not all organizations are like that. A lot of creative organizations aren't like that. A lot of professional services organizations aren't like that, where some people need access to some applications, others need access to other applications. You have people who have the need for 3 monitors or just a laptop or whatever. We should be really saying, what is the function of this device? What are we doing with it? What applications does it need to run? What does the solution need to look like in the end? You know, we can figure out what hardware it needs, but what are we actually trying to accomplish with this specific device for this specific person? Now's the time to define that role. If we can define that role now, we're really going to get the most out of our investment in Windows 10 as we move off to it. So what do you need actually moving forward? So as I said, we have this inventory of applications, all these things you do with the device, but like when I just replaced my PC, there were applications on it that wasn't even using anymore. These applications didn't really matter. So when I migrated to the Dell that I'm doing this at, I didn't I didn't need all that stuff. I focused on the things I did need. So we can streamline things, and it's worth your time to do too. We don't want to spend excessive money on software or products that we have to support that could potentially be flawed. Let's streamline. Let's say, well, what do we need right now for this person? What data needs to come with you to the new device? Now, in general, again, you've probably heard this if you've been on my webinars before, I believe in data centralization, which is to say data that is important to the organization should be in a centralized place where it can be backed up, secured, encrypted if necessary, all of that stuff. It should be on a centralized location. Now, I also live in the real world where I realize that doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's personal stuff, which is fine. People have their own personal photos on their PC or something like that. I can understand why they might want to move that over and not have it on a server, but we definitely need to take an inventory of this. And by the way, if this is an opportunity now to say, maybe we could better centrally manage our data, maybe we need to organize our data on our file server, our SharePoint or whatever a little bit better, now's a great time to think about that stuff before we make these wholesale changes. The last thing we want to do is remove a device and lose everything that's on it. But it's really up to the end users to define for us, the technology providers, what you're actually doing with these products so that we can help guide you. We could be your sort of Sherpa through this process. What's on your wish list? The device I have now, I'm using a laptop, and it's got a little docking station so I can have 3 monitors and all that stuff. When we replaced my machine, I wanted to do all sorts of different things with it, and so there was a consideration. I wanted to have a device with a better battery so that when I go on the road, I don't have to worry about charging it all the time. I wanted to have, at the same time, I didn't care about the 4K monitor that the device could have had. I mean, does that really matter for what I do? Probably not. Think about what you actually need to do to be productive, and now's the time to do it. It's really a good situation. Most business productivity things are easily achievable. Things that used to be super expensive, like these dual or 3 monitor setups, are a lot more modest than they used to be. So bring your wish list and let's see what we can do. As I mentioned before, Microsoft generally recommends replacement of Windows 7 devices, but upgrades are possible. So I'm not saying no. I'm not saying we're not going to do an in-place upgrade. I'm just saying that in all likelihood, I'm going to recommend it against it, depending on your situation. So I would almost assume that you're going to be replacing the device. The future of Windows and other applications. So I wanted to speak to this. So now that we've discussed the idea of, just sort of a plan, coming up with planning and going in a direction in terms of replacing Windows 7, I want to talk about how this may look into the future. Now, I'm not a psychic. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I don't know who knows if, I assume Microsoft will exist in 5 years, but what if some crazy thing happened and Microsoft didn't exist? But the point is, on the direction they're going now, where is Microsoft and other applications going? So again, Windows is going to be as a service and more cloud-based. What Microsoft really wants to do, and it makes a lot of sense, both for small businesses, for budgeting, for planning, for cost of ownership, and the systems lifecycle, to be a service. It's a lot easier to swallow small monthly fees that are associated with having your email in the cloud, with having Office provided to you as part of a subscription. This is going to continue to be the trend. We're also going to see, and I'm going to speak to this a little bit later, in the SMB space, more things going to software as a service models, to hosted server models, etc. So Microsoft could be foolish and just stick with their previous approach where they were going to say, well, you have to buy this box for Microsoft Office and this box for Windows 10 and all that stuff, but it wouldn't suit the model we're in now. And to be honest, Microsoft was pretty forward thinking when they first came up with Office 365. Maybe they didn't implement it 100%, perfectly at first, but I think their model made a lot of sense when you see where the industry has gone the past few years. As of this moment, and I wouldn't count on this maintaining, end of life for Windows 10 is October 2025. So Microsoft Windows 10 has been out for a little bit. Think about if you put a Windows 10 device in now, 2025 comes along, that's 6 years, we'll probably have a different version of Windows or potentially sort of a Apple style Windows 10.1 type thing, or I feel like that's probably where it's going to go. There's a lot of time between now and October 2025 when Windows 10 is hits end of life. It could be that they remove the idea of end of life, make the platform leaner, and it's just Windows 10 perpetuates as this ongoing product, and that there is no real end of life. It's just this particular version goes away, and then everybody else just gets those upgrades. Windows 10 is very lean, so that is a very conceivable thing. But again, I would say if you're making the replacement now from 7 to 10, that's about the lifespan you could expect on Windows 10 is when that device fails for hardware. So, let's say you buy it now, 2023, 2024 comes along, you decide you want a new PC, they'll probably be whatever the next iteration is. What about Windows Server 2008? So this is a whole other animal. It's not the same sort of situation as Windows 7, but they go end of life at the same time, so you have to plan for both. They're two different tracks. So with Windows 7, we have to plan specifically on the idea of making sure the user experience and the data is the same or better from Windows 7 to Windows 10. With Server 2008, it's more about we are adjusting it's almost like rearranging a business department in your office. We're going to be taking something that is functional now, and we're going to be retooling the entire thing. What it does, how it does, where it sits, who sits where, all that stuff. So the first thing we have to ask if we have a Server 2008 device is what is the role of the server? What is the purpose as it relates to other servers in the environment, as it relates to the PCs, the applications you use, our disaster recovery solution, so on and so forth. That is the number one thing we have to ask. And is that role even necessary moving forward? It's extremely common, at least from what I can see, where we have clients that were decommissioning old servers, and as we decommission the server, we say, well, what are we going to do about application X? And they go, we haven't used application X in 3 years. Well, that's a simple plan. We just have to decommission the server, figure out if we need to hold on to data or something like that for some period of time. Basically, how do we gracefully shut something down? I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case with many of the Server 2008 boxes that are out there still, that they just have a very minor or legacy function that we just have to come up with a sunsetting plan for. If it's an application server, is the core application satisfactory, right? So let's get back to application X. If you're running application X, it's on the server, but all of your people are sick and tired of it. They don't like the way it works. The buttons don't make sense. They're not in the right place. It's slow, not because of the server, but because the application is not designed well. Whatever the issue is. Now is the time to figure out if we really want that application in place still. Or alternatively, is there something we can migrate it to? Maybe something that's a software as a service model that suits you better, maybe saves you money, maybe accomplishes a workflow challenge that you're having now with your product. We should think about those applications. Nothing should be sacred when it comes to server migrations. We should be questioning everything. I would rather question it and decide that we're okay, moving forward, sort of a horizontal move where we're doing the same things before, than not question it and just keep doing something because we've been doing it. That's really the worst way to do technology. Well, this is the way it was before, so we're going to do it this way now just because we're comfortable with that. We should be willing to challenge those things a little bit. And if it turns out that what we're doing now is best, that's great. But at the same time, we would be remiss to not challenge our expectations. What sensitive data is stored on the server? So if we have a box that either we're decommissioning or migrating, and it has sensitive data that maybe is of a compliance concern or business liability concern, we really should document that and plan accordingly. That will impact our migration or our decommissioning. We may need to involve people who do data destruction, like shredding companies. We may need to involve, we may even need to document things. If we're destroying something and we're concerned about the compliance, we should be documenting that destruction. If it's going off to the cloud, let's say we're taking the sensitive data and it goes from us to some application provider. Well, that actual transfer of that sensitive data is now a potential risk factor for us. So we need to plan for that as well. So that's a super important thing we have to identify. And again, sensitive data could be a lot of things, right? I keep talking about compliance and security stuff. It could just be sensitive, like a trade secret or something that you really, really care about that maybe doesn't have a specific monetary value. It's up to you to define what data is important to you. But once you define that, we can help plan for it. So getting back to what about Windows Server 2008? So what are the upgraded deployment options? So I say options, and one concept I've been discussing with people is the difference between potential options and real options. So if you're talking about servers and applications running on those servers or functions running on those servers, there's a good chance that there's a cloud-based solution for it. We need to look at what those options are. Maybe it's something like building a similar thing in the Azure cloud. So Microsoft offers, similar to what you'd have in-house in a data center, just not located in your office. Maybe that's the right option. Maybe you just need the Active Directory functions of Microsoft Azure, the user rights, the roles, the access to the right information, the tracking, the security, etc. So we don't even get a server, we just get the roles of that server. Maybe because of what you do, we really do need an in-house server still. I fully expect that we will have people with in-house servers for the foreseeable future. There is still a place for in-house servers, maybe less than there was before. We have to look at all these options. Really, if there's something that's really not a good option, we should just disqualify it and then scrutinize what is actually plausible. The real options. I'm going to put my thumb on the scale a little bit here and say, chances are, if we can put something in the cloud or host it somewhere, that's probably the direction we should be going, especially in the small, medium business space. But each is unique, and we should at least have a discussion about it. Do I still need backup disaster recovery solutions? What kind of hardware do I need? What firewalls need to be in place, battery backups, etc.? As you might imagine, and I was talking with a client about this last week, if you take a bunch of servers that are sitting in a network closet somewhere or on a rack somewhere, and you say, well, now they're with Microsoft Azure or a private cloud provider or a software as a service provider or wherever, chances are you probably don't need 3 battery backup units. You may still need 1 because you want to make sure that your firewall is battery protected and so on. You probably don't need an expensive tape backup solution if you're even using that sort of thing anymore, or what have you. The firewall you're using right now might be an enterprise level firewall. We might need a more modest small business firewall. Or it could be the opposite. It could be that because we are taking all of our assets that we keep in our office and now we're putting them in the cloud, we might need a better firewall, maybe something with redundancy or load balancing, where we could have 2 internet connections come into it, where we get more bandwidth, etc. When we make these changes, it's about putting the resources in the right place. And just because we did something, we had a paradigm with infrastructure before, doesn't mean we have to stick with that paradigm in the future. So all that stuff that supports your server, that's not sacred either, and we should look at it as we make these changes. Do we need to review the server configuration? So it may not come as a surprise to you that often when staff come on board or are terminated for whatever reason, that roles, that accounts are not up to date. We don't always hear when someone is let go, unfortunately. And so that person has an account and that account's active, we got to get rid of that stuff. Furthermore, people may have different roles. It's oftentimes we take over a network and you look in the system and you find out that there are tons of system admins, people who don't need admin rights that have those rights. We may need to look at that stuff as we make these changes. So really important. And again, all these things that I'm talking about with Server 2008, it's why we really need to take our time with the server stuff, plan this out, and start thinking about it now. Because replacing a server is not a trivial matter. It may seem like we're just moving from one box to the other and reconnecting. You know, we think of these things very logically, but all that stuff behind the scenes is critical to success. And so if we don't plan for it up front, we will have significant problems during implementation. But the ones we plan out, they tend to be the easiest ones. They tend to be the least stressful ones. They tend to be the most cost controlled, all that stuff. So start planning now, because Server 2008 will take more time to transition than Windows 7. You know, if you said to me, I have a staff member, they have a Windows 7 PC, we want to move them to Windows 10 today, we could probably do it. It probably wouldn't be that hard. A Server 2008 server, if you're contacting us in December about it, we are going to have a difficult time. It will be a difficult change unless it's a very basic thing. Plus, you know, there's resources and other considerations out there. What if we need a piece of hardware and supplies are short? You know, it's very common in our business where we see PCs be in short supply for whatever reason. I would expect at the end of this year, we'll probably have a little bit of a rush like that, where it's going to be harder to get desktop PCs because there's some more orders coming in. I remember when some of the tariff stuff was going on earlier this year, we had a little bit of a crunch on PCs and stuff like that. So I think we need to consider all that stuff because it's going to take some time. The cloud's impact in the future. So I want to speak about this a little bit before we get into questions and answers, because the cloud is a big part of this. I just want to give my view of where I think the cloud is leading us as it pertains to this stuff and how it might impact these migration plans. In the past, it used to be that when we had any server or any function we needed to accomplish, we had a server for it, whether it was a physical or virtual server. We need remote access into our system. Well, we're going to build a terminal server or a Citrix server. We need some place to store our files. Okay, we're going to build a file server for that. We need something that's going to govern passwords and user rights and all this stuff and the relationships between applications. Okay, we're going to have an Active Directory server. You just build and build and build. It's like laying bricks. You put one brick on top of another brick on top of another brick. Fortunately for everyone, I think, the cloud is making it so that some of these functions are very much plausible without having an in-house server. Rather than have a very expensive piece of hardware locally that stores all these files that you have to back up, you can just say, well, I just need files and the rights to them, and I'm going to put them in SharePoint with Microsoft Azure AD, and you basically get the functions you want without the bloat and maintenance and security concerns of a physical server in-house. That's very common. But anyway, for enterprise businesses, big businesses, places that have a huge data center impact, I guess you could include the federal government in this, other places. The truth is, they're going to probably continue to use servers and data centers to some extent. The economies of scale that small businesses achieve from taking these services and going to the cloud, the reason why Microsoft can offer Office 365 accounts with all these things bundled into them for a pretty reasonable monthly fee is because they're selling it to 1 million people or whatever the number is. When you're a big company with, say, 50,000 employees, you could realize those economies of scale building your own data centers. So I would expect you'll still see a little bit of that in an enterprise space. But by contrast, small to mid-sized businesses are going to see more device agnostic solutions and cloud-based solutions. So this kind of impacts what I was saying about the Windows 10 and get what you want kind of approach, create your wish list. I remember when I was working several years ago, and a big thing I did at the former company I was at was EMR migration, implementing new electronic medical record systems for our clients. And I remember I used to look at requirement sheets where it'd say, well, this is the requirement for the server and this is the requirement for the PC. And you had to get very specific on these PCs. You had to have a certain amount of RAM and the right processor, the right version of Windows, maybe .NET frameworks, all sorts of things. Those device requirements are getting a lot simpler on the endpoint. Now they're saying, do you have a Windows 10 PC? Does it have Internet Explorer or whatever? And does it have this much RAM? You're good to go. it's more about, with devices, it's more about what people want than what an application needs these days, as long as those tools and products are supportable. So that's a really good thing for the end user, I think. It's going to make work and life a lot more flexible, a lot more friendly to remote access, and a lot more productive. So there's also going to be, and this is already happening, and this is something, as if you've attended my webinars in the past, something I talk about, a shift in managing vulnerabilities and security. Think about when you have all of your servers in a network closet that's in your office. Now we're basically building like a bank vault, kind of. We have to lock the door and get the ventilation and make sure the power's there and make sure that the cooling is there and make sure it's secure and make sure that if it's breached that we have a managed SOC solution so we can monitor traffic on it and all sorts of stuff like that. We're basically building a defensive perimeter around our servers in-house. As you might imagine, if we move these servers and these roles out to the cloud, we're not building these crazy network closets anymore. Now we're just maybe, putting the firewall in a secure spot or something like that, a place where it can't be tampered with. Furthermore, when you think about cyber crime and hacking and stuff like that, the targets were shifting anyway. Phishing, social engineering are really attacking the users. The technology gets better, but the users become the weak point. And so if you move this stuff into the cloud, we need to focus a lot more on the endpoints that people are using, the devices that people are using to make sure that, for example, the data that sits on them at rest is encrypted if it's sensitive, that the user has the appropriate rights. So if their account is hacked, that they're limiting their exposure, that their data is located in the right place, that the users know how to react to sketchy emails, that they're getting security awareness training on compliance management so that they do the right things, that we have good policies in place, that users are reinforced, all that stuff. I think the traditional idea of protecting servers and hardware is a little bit outdated. We need to focus on both devices and users. And if you're not doing both of these things, then you're basically inevitably waiting for some kind of data breach or significant consequence to your technology. So I would very strongly say if you haven't created a security awareness platform where you're training people on things to look out for, threats, et cetera, doing phishing testing, if you aren't doing some kind of vulnerability assessment on actual devices that you're going to maintain into the future or have some kind of management plan on the devices you have in the future, patch management, maintenance, et cetera, you really need to get on that because these are going to be where the targets come. Just our final thoughts before Q&A. If I haven't said it enough already, don't wait to begin planning for the end of Windows 7. You can't wait. It's just, we're already basically, if you ask me, if you haven't started planning this yet, we're already maybe a little too late. We need to start right now and get a plan in place and start addressing this. Protect yourself against malware. I brought this up earlier. WannaCry targeted Windows XP, and I think the threat is worse this time. I think that it is easier to identify these devices. I think people are more easily exposed and more targeted by phishing, which could exploit weaknesses in Windows 7. I just think that the threats out there are more significant so that the people who are on Windows 7 on January 15, 2020, I think the threat is going to be worse. Now, I don't have any, I'll be honest, I don't have any statistics or anything to back this up. This is just my instinct. I just think that since attacks are going up, vulnerabilities are going up, our exposure into the internet is going up, that we have more devices out there, it just makes sense that it's going to be a bigger threat now than before. And so I don't want us to be in this position. I'm very happy to say when the WannaCry thing happened a few years ago, we didn't really have an issue with our clients here because we moved them off of Windows XP. And it was a big headline and it made huge news, but to us, it wasn't that big of a deal for our clients, and I'm very proud of that. These are significant changes. We have to start thinking about them now. This is not a trivial thing. We can't wait till the end of the year. The changes are going to be impactful. And most technology failures come from a lack of planning. The truth is there's great hardware out there. There's great software out there. We've made so much progress. I started in the managed services industry in 2005. The hardware and technology and solutions are so much better today than they used to be. And so when people aren't happy with them, it's usually because they picked the wrong stuff, that they planned the wrong things in advance. It's not that, if they went and bought a $1,000 PC, the chances are it's probably a pretty decent PC. It's probably going to get the job done for a specific function. But if you're just buying something because somebody told you it was good, or that you heard that the guy in the suite across the hall bought this computer, or you like the way it looked, or you can't think about planning, you can count on having a significant challenge in the future. And with that, we're going to take some questions. So thanks so much for listening to the talk.
All right, great. Thanks, Ben. All right, as I said earlier, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them out in the question box, and we will answer them as best as we can. Okay, looks like we do have one came in. What's the best, most efficient way to upgrade a PC or laptop from Windows 7?
You're speaking, it sounds like you're speaking specifically to doing the upgrade, like a software upgrade, correct? So I'm not 100% sure.
Just a software upgrade, yes, he says.
Yeah. So I wouldn't call it necessarily an efficient way. We still have to take the same approach. So we have to identify on the machine what applications it runs, who's using it, when they use it, how they use it, wish list stuff, everything that I had in one of the earlier slides. But then the problem, and the reason it's not simple, is because we now have to back up the machine in case the migration does not work. We start installing Windows and there's some kind of problem with the installation of Windows, which is something that does happen when you're doing these in-place upgrades. We have to buy the license, which could be, I think it's often $200 for the license that we require for many users, especially if you're using Office 365 to get Windows 10. So you have to pay for that, which is quite expensive when you think about the actual cost of a PC. You have to think about all the applications that are running on it. A lot of the applications besides Windows are going to require upgrades and changes to get to Windows 10. So the question is kind of a trick question in the sense that you say, well, what's the simplest way? This is kind of another reason why doing the in-place upgrade it doesn't make much sense. It makes more sense to build a Windows 10 image from scratch, build a machine from scratch, image that machine so you can do future upgrades simply. There's efficiencies that we can get from this. But it's hard to make a case for a totally efficient upgrade from Windows 7 to Windows 10, especially when you're dealing with specific business software. Again, I don't want to generalize too much. Your individual situation may be better and different, and I think we could look at that based on who it is. But I don't want to set the expectation that there are simple Windows 7 to Windows 10 upgrades. It doesn't necessarily work that way.
Okay, great. Another question came in. Is there an upgrade available for Server 2008 similar to Windows 10 for Windows 7?
You're definitely not going to have, even with the Windows 7 so if Windows 7 to Windows 10 has its own considerations for an in-place upgrade, Server 2008 to say, well, really, we'd have to go to Server, I think, 2016 is absolutely not simple. And it's not really an in-kind upgrade. Generally, if we are doing an upgrade on a server, it's not a technical term, but I would say we're going to blow away the old server, as in we're going to wipe it from scratch, load the operating system on, load the applications on, build the machine from scratch, which is a little different from Windows 7, where we might just, you install an upgrade in kind and it just sort of changes the machine from one to the other. With a Windows server, we're going to completely crush the machine and bring it back to something new. So I don't think I would probably do that.
Okay. All right, great. Next question. If I move my servers to the cloud, will I have to worry about upgrading the Windows server again?
That is an excellent question. So one of the big benefits of moving to the cloud is that in some ways you're kind of future-proofing yourself. And even though I'm not going to talk about this with servers, I'll use the example of Office 365, even though it's not about a server per se. When you subscribe to Office 365 and you get on the platform, the changes happen on the back end. It changes on the services end. If Microsoft decides that whatever core operating system these platforms are running on needs to change, they make those changes, and maybe they do some sort of update notification that something is changing on your end. You have to install some application or whatever, but you see the bare minimum of it. And I would expect that if you move applications or servers to the cloud or software as a service models, you'll see something similar where you say, I'll use QuickBooks as an example. You have QuickBooks that sits on a server right now, and you decide I want to use QuickBooks on their software as a service model. You're going to move your data off of there, and you're just going to maintain your subscription to QuickBooks. If you said, to look at it another way, if you said I have this Server 2008 box, and I want to get a full Azure server in the cloud that that has the operating system on, and I put Server 2016 on it, we may have to make in the cloud and upgrade to that OS. Now, maybe that's not as painful as a server change right now would be with an in-house server, but it's still along those same lines. So it's going to depend a little bit, but I would say in general, the benefit of moving to the cloud is one of the benefits is future-proofing. It makes those future challenges that much less challenging. And again, in general, when we talk about Windows and Server 2008 and all this other stuff, one big benefit of all this cloud stuff and lowering our footprint here is that it's going to make these future changes that we make a little bit simpler. It's going to make things a little bit easier. It's going to force us, of course, to focus more on the end users and focus on the devices that they touch, which is fine, but it's going to make the big picture infrastructure challenges, I think, a little bit easier for most.
Okay. Looks like we have one more question that came in. If we had Macs, would we have to deal with these same concerns?
Yes. So Apple is more strict about these things in the sense that, I'll speak from personal experience. So years and years and years ago, I had a MacBook, just one of those plain, I couldn't even tell you what model. It was a plain white MacBook. I want to say like a 12-inch screen or something. And it was OS 10. I think OS 10 technically is still what they use. They tend to do very incremental upgrades. But Apple, and they do this with the phones too, is very much into forced obsolescence. So there will be upgrades to OS 10, and it will say your device doesn't support it. I remember with that laptop, one day I was using it, and there was an OS 10 upgrade that I needed to for iTunes because I got a new iPad. So like I wanted my iPad to talk to iTunes, and so when I tried to upgrade iTunes, it wouldn't work. It said you had to upgrade the OS. So then I got the OS upgrade. I tried to do that, and it says this laptop will not support this upgrade. It should have, like from a hardware perspective, it probably should have allowed the upgrade. I don't think the machine was incapable of running that version. But Apple draws some very strict lines. One of the things people say about Apple is everything just works together, and that's often very true when you use the tools and products that they want you to use. And by being kind of draconian about their end-of-life stuff, they get very easy things to support often. But if you have a Mac that's an old OS that is not supported anymore, that is not getting patches, it probably has flaws that could be exploited. It's not like Macs are made of some special thing that makes them more secure. They just maybe are targeted in different ways. So yeah, if you have a Mac, these same concerns come up.
All right, good to know. All right, we have another question just pop up. Tips for migrating from Exchange SBS 2011 to Office 365.
That is an engineering question. We could do a whole thing about what it takes to go from SBS 2011 to 365. I will say that is very achievable. It's something we have done, and it's something we will continue to do. I would very much recommend you contact me, or if you're an existing client, you can contact your rep offline, and we can have a broader discussion of it. Essentially, big picture, we have to basically say, well, what are all of the mailboxes that exist on the small business server, as well as its other roles? Remember, we're talking about the server itself and the roles that server plays, like maybe Active Directory, or if it does any kind of file services, et cetera. And we have to find places for them. We have to outline those functions to say, well, this is where this goes, this is where that goes, this is where the other thing goes. In the case of 365, we're probably talking files and email. But the other things it does too, we have to consider, come up with a plan for all of those things, and then begin that migration. We take all the data off the server. We, in the case of Office 365, we often use a tool called Skykick to push that data off to the cloud in advance so that we have a clean migration. When people bring up their new email through Office 365, that stuff's already sitting there. That's a really nice feature. But your specific migration from SBS 2011 to Office 365 and whatever other things we have to do is probably going to be unique to you. And so I would say, if you're really curious about it, let's follow up offline. Let's have a chat about it and go from there, because I think it's really worth the investment of time.
Okay, great. Any other questions? I don't see anything coming through. But like I said, I will be posting a copy of the webinar on our website a little later today, so if you want to go check it, I'll also be sending an email out later today as well.
Well, thanks. Thanks, everybody, for attending. Really appreciate it. My contact information is here, bschmerler@dpsolutions.com. I'm extension 106 here. Feel free to reach out to me. Happy to answer questions. And we'll be doing another webinar next month on more stuff. So make sure you are on the security tips. Make sure you're on our email list. Make sure you sign up for that stuff. And look forward to seeing you next month. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks, everybody.